Good evening, live from the Soaping Hills and Vertic Greens of North Carolina Central University. I'm excited to be back home with my buddy Josh Gunn.
Yes,
so excited to be on the campus of NCCU to talk about the future of Durham, North Carolina. And I'm so grateful for Josh, who is running for City Council here in Durham. First of all, tell us a little bit about you. If this is the first time people are hearing from you and seeing you.
Well, in relation to Durham, I was born and raised here. Right, I'm a fourth generation Durhamite. That's what I always lead with. My great grandfather moved here, just one generation removed from slavery. Right, So I've always been raised with this deep passion for what Durham is and what it can be. Initially, that passion was manifested through music. Right, so since I was 7 years old, I've been writing, performing, touring, creating music. I've had the opportunity to tour the world and do television and score movies and star in a movie, and can really say my dreams came true, right? And I feel like I owe so much of that to the community of Durham, the city of Durham, the people of Durham. I'm honored to be back here and have the ability to serve, for future generations and for the generations that exist now.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about you coming back to Durham, and you did go to North Carolina A&T State University. I feel like all my friends just made up that symbol. I don't know where that came from.
I never really liked that, bro. It's like I'm not a fan of that.
I have lots of friends that are Aggies, okay?
I'd rather say Aggie Pride. We never did this one. So I don't know who's doing it.
But, so music, let's talk about music, right? Like, what inspires you inside of music, and where is music going?
Yeah, the first question, what inspires me? I've always been inspired by my environment, right? And the people in that environment. I'm a storyteller. That's the core of the type of hip hop I make is telling stories, whether my own or other people's story. The thing about my music is that it always has an aspirational tone. I feel like hip hop is always about overcoming some circumstance or being or defying the odds or expectations. So just the ability to be greater than you are, you know what I mean, is what inspires me. And the way that other people overcome their circumstances inspires me. And I think to connect that back to Durham inspires me because it's always a city that punches above its weight, right? It's like a small city, but with so much character and culture, and ends up on every top 10 list every time with much larger cities and metropolitan areas. So I think that sort of aspirational nature and the ability to be more than meets the eye inspires me personally and musically.
Do you consider yourself the underdog in this city council race?
Yeah, of course, man. I think, in Durham today, there's an established political machine. And there are established politicians, and me not being a politician by career, just someone who has a desire to serve, is a little bit different on the scene right now. And I'm new too, right? I'm a new face, and people know me as a rapper or community organizer or festival founder or business person. So that makes me an underdog too. It's just a new face and a new person in the game. But I think this is about the people of Durham, and the people of Durham know me. I know the people here. I am excited about the ability to serve them the way that I have. Whether I'm in a seat or not, I'm going to continue to serve the community. So I think, hopefully that resonates with people and they go to the polls and vote.
Man, breaking news, North Carolina is not doing well. I live in New York, and it's international news that North Carolina politics is deceptive and dishonest. If that is seeping down into the Durham area, what would you say to voters who are fed up with how politics is, and what do you bring to the table to comfort them?
Yeah, man, I am extremely frustrated with the general political climate in Durham. I mean, in North Carolina, not Durham, sorry. In North Carolina, the state that happens to house Durham. And for years, right, we've seen, HB2 and other embarrassing legislation passed through the State House. And, the results of yesterday's election, the special in District 9 was disappointing, embarrassing, right? A friend of mine made a sign that says, "Now leaving North Carolina, welcome to Durham." I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
It was sort of a joke, but it really represents sort of just disgust with the general political climate in our state government right now, and that disgust mirrors the disgust that we have with our federal government, right, and the person that sits in the White House. As it relates to Durham, I think we're fortunate because we do have progressive leadership here in Durham. We have a very vocal and robust democracy. But I do think there are, forces that would try to compromise that. And what I would say to Durham folks is be wary of people who try to, sort of indoctrinate you to one philosophy or another. Use your own mind and vote for your own interests, right? Think about your community, your neighbors, what they need, what they're dealing with today, and elect the leaders that speak to that, rather than electing a leader based on, what banner they hold or what organization has endorsed them. It should really be about that particular leader and the ability to hold them up on their own character and their own record.
Sure.
And I think that's the way we fight against corruption, is voting, in spite of special interests, voting for our own interests. You know what I mean?
And what are your interests? I know economic development is very important. Tell me about that.
My two sort of main platform pieces or focuses as a candidate are public safety. Right now in Durham, our murder rate is up 20%.
Wow.
Last I checked, and we just had another homicide yesterday. We've had 50 shootings in 3 weeks. I grew up here. I remember some violent years in the 90s, and unfortunately, this feels a lot like the 90s. This 2019 does, and Durham, when I was a kid, was called the murder capital of North Carolina, right? And that's not something to be proud of. That's not something I think we should, try to race back to, right? And I think a lot of the violence that we're experiencing is a function of economics, right? People don't commit crimes because they're bad people. People commit crimes based on a circumstance that they're in, likely trying to provide for themselves or their family, right? If people's basic needs aren't met, this, but people's basic needs aren't met, they're more likely to lean into crime, right? And we have an absence of opportunity right now in Durham. 20% of our residents are in poverty right now. That's 50,000 people plus today in Durham, one of the most economically prosperous cities in North Carolina, but 20% of our residents live in poverty. So that learning that and being exposed to that really alarmed me. I lived adjacent to that poverty all of my life, right? My family members, my friends, right? Sort of either one generation removed from public housing or in public housing currently. So I've seen it and experienced it. But to really look at the numbers and then juxtapose that against the real life stories that I've heard and lived through, it's frustrating, right? Especially when I see the vast amount of wealth that comes into the community. So I think public safety and economic development are really related. We have to renew our focus on creating jobs in the city, re-engage the business community as a force for good rather than an adversary to some of our progressive movements. Because the reality is, for Black and brown folks specifically, we don't have the privilege to be anti-business, right? Business, getting a job or starting a business is our way out of poverty, right? That's our pathway out of poverty. And today we have leaders who are, sort of touting this anti-business narrative that I think is negatively impacting our city, and specifically those 20% of our residents who are living in poverty, and not to mention those that are on that poverty line as well, right? And the income disparity in Durham is very visible, right? You drive 1 block away from downtown in any direction, you can see it.
Wow.
So that's what gets me upset and frustrated, and that's why I'm leaning into that frustration to be able to serve our city. Because I think people are hurting in Durham, and we need real leadership that's going to address those concerns.
I want to shift to education, and of course we're at North Carolina Central. How important is education inside of public safety and economic development?
Yeah, I think education is obviously vital and critical. I think I'd like to see us rethink, sort of reimagine education, though. You and I went to college, right? We're both college educated, and we took that path, right? A traditional 4-year institution. I think for us, the economy in Durham is great, right? If you have a 4-year degree or a master's degree, there's a richness of opportunity for you, rather than the tech space or other corporate jobs. You can go walk out the door and find one today. But for the vast majority of our residents, that's not the case, right? And they are folks who either have a high school degree or who have some sort of 2-year degree or some other form of training. We have an absence of opportunities for them. So I think as we think about education, right, we shouldn't force everyone down one career path, which in our generation was college, right? We sort of just told everybody to go to college and then you work it out. But that doesn't work for everyone, right? Some folks aren't interested in college. For some people, it's not a good fit. But we should be providing and creating career opportunities across the spectrum. And so from an education standpoint at the city, here in Durham, the city doesn't fund our school system. That's a county issue. But I am on the DPS Foundation board, which is the way to engage the private sector in helping to fund initiatives in school. And I think that's a critical connection that we're missing, which is the people who provide the jobs connecting with the students who need the jobs. And I'll tell you a story. So a friend of mine that I know went to high school here in Durham, ended up going to college for a little bit. College really wasn't for him, came back to Durham, was looking for opportunity, couldn't find a job, ended up doing something illegal, right? Selling drugs to provide for himself. In the process of doing that, a bullet goes through his window and kills his mother. The bullet was aimed at him, And it took his mother dying for him to sort of like, okay, I need to change my life and do something different. He now has a really successful job in the construction trade. He makes a significant income for him and his family. But we had a conversation on a flight one night, and he was like, man, I just wish that when I was 14 and I was already frustrated with sort of this college track that I was being placed on, someone came to my class and said, hey, there's other opportunities for you. If you go get a job in construction, you can make $80,000 a year and provide for your family. He's like, I would have never picked up the dope or, picked up that pack to sell on the corner. And not to say that his mother would still be here, but more than likely she would, right? And there are people in Durham having to make those difficult choices right now because we are not, as a city, doing our job to provide opportunities for them and then provide them the training to take those opportunities.
I just got back from Africa, and so one thing I'm clear about is that people don't know that they matter.
Yeah.
And I hear that in your story. People won't choose certain things if self-awareness and mattering are clear.
Yeah.
What can we do about that in the city of Durham, and where do you see yourself inside of that kind of conversation as a leader?
Man, that's such a heavy, as you said that, I had several thoughts, right? I think back to my upbringing, right? And I think back to what hip-hop did for me, right? Hip-hop was my mechanism for knowing that I mattered, right? And it was the hip-hop of the 90s, right? Where it was a lot of knowledge of self preaching, right? A lot of 5%er influence, and which, for better or for worse, however we feel about those movements, what they did, especially for black folks, is remind us of the excellence of our ancestors, right? Remind us that our history didn't begin with slavery or end with slavery, right? That we have a richness of history and legacy, which I think helps you ground yourself, right? Helps you realize that you do matter and you have value, and that value is steeped in where you come from and in the power of your ancestors. I think in Durham, as a city, we have an inferiority complex. I think, I spent my whole career like repping Durham everywhere I went, right? And it was really largely to overcome that inferiority complex. But I see that in our youth. I visited, we have a school in Durham called Lakeview, which is they would call it an alternative school. So it's your last chance. If you get suspended from traditional school, they send you to Lakeview. When you go to Lakeview, the culture in Lakeview feels a lot like a prison. Just the hopelessness, the despair, sort of the rival gang culture that exists there, and just the feeling that they have no way out and they don't matter, right? They feel like they don't matter. They feel like they have no value. And I met with the principal there, and she's trying really hard to instill that in them and to eliminate that sort of prison industrial element from their school and give them things like a nice cafeteria and, some of those things. But I think it starts early with the general messaging of our city, reminding people that Durham is not a place that you just happen to be born in, that we're fortunate to be born here, and that there's an incredible legacy. When you went to NCCU, so you learned about it. You learned about James Shepard, and you learned about Black Wall Street, and you get that knowledge, but it took you until you get to college to get that. I think we need to ensure that people are learning Durham history in elementary school and learning the history of their forefathers and their ancestors early on, so that they do develop that pride in the place that they're from. You live in New York now, and you live in Harlem now. You see how proud folks are in New York City, right? It's like, yeah. And not that New York City doesn't have some of the same issues we do, sure. But I think it starts with just instilling that pride in the place you're from and the people that, your ancestors and the people that brought you here to this place. Beyond that, it's about creating opportunities and access to those opportunities. When you get your first job, right, you feel a little better about yourself. The moment you pay your first bill on your own, or you go to your mom and say, hey mom, I got this bill today, you feel better about yourself. And unfortunately, a lot of our children, our youth, are getting that feeling, but they're getting it from illegal activities because they don't see any access to other opportunities. I think a lot of the root of this is economics, and some of it is culture as well, but much of it is tied to economics in this particular city.
I'll give you the final word. All right. Anything that you want to tell people about you and I'm very interested. I heard a lot. I'm very interested in what pulls you apart from the rest. What makes you stand out from the competition? You're going against the incumbents, sure. The people who are there. Why do we choose you?
So I think, as I mentioned before, we're fortunate in Durham to have great progressive leadership, right? And on the big picture issues, me and my opponents likely agree on most things, right? If we're talking about national politics, the incumbents in this race and I are going to check the same boxes, right? We are likely going to vote for the same folks on a national scale. We believe in equity. We believe in, a woman's right to choose. We believe in LGBTQ rights. We believe in sort of these big, broad picture issues that we align on as progressives, right? But where I think we differ is two things. The first is perspective. None of the incumbents were born and raised here. None of them have a connection to the city beyond their first generation here. So they lack that context and that perspective that's necessary to truly represent the people. It's difficult to represent people in a city that you don't know, right? It's one thing to see the numbers. It's one thing for me to say there's 20% of your people in poverty, and you'd say, man, that's awful. But it's different when you know those people. It's different when those are your aunts and your uncles and the folks you went to Durham public schools with. So that perspective and context, I think, is different, vital, and it's missing from council today. The other thing is that the three incumbents are running as a team, as a unit. So they've essentially signaled to the city that we agree on everything, right? We're just all voting as one block. So you're essentially voting for three of the exact same thing, which to me is not representative democracy, right? We're a diverse city with diverse perspectives of thought, and in order to be truly representative, we need that diversity on our council. Not just diversity of representation, right? Not just how many black folks you got, how many women you got, not just those things, but diversity of thought and perspective, and we lack that today. So those are two things that I bring to the table. And the third thing that I think is worth mentioning is there's an absence today on our council of pragmatism, right? A focus on practical solutions for our problems. In Durham, we just I hate to say wasted, but we just invested and lost $157 million of public money on a failed light rail system. Several people 20 years ago, when we first started talking about light rail, said that maybe this is not the right size solution for the city of Durham. We moved forward. When we moved forward, we decided to create a regional system between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, right? So that makes sense. There's about 2 million, maybe even 3 million people now in the Triangle metro area. So light rail still maybe makes sense. Raleigh decided to say no to light rail. Durham still continued to move forward. So we're investing tons of public money in this project that really never made sense for a city or a metro of our size. We could have taken that revenue and created a bus rapid transit system, which elevates our buses, makes them more efficient, but doesn't cost the taxpayers $157 million. And I think a lot of that was steeped in a focus on high-level national politics and not practical solutions for the city of Durham, right? I think oftentimes we forget that what's most important in a local government is focusing on the local issues. That's something also that I bring to the table, and I think drastically separates me from the three incumbents, at least, and with all respects to the other candidates that are running as well. I think that's a unique perspective I bring.
Okay, one more question. How is it to work with Dame Dash?
Yo, Dame is like, I call him my uncle now. When I talk to him, I call him Uncle Dusko, because that's his alter ego is Dusko Poppington. Working with Dame was amazing, man. Like, what I can say about Dame is fearless, and he doesn't care if you like him. You know what I'm saying? Like, he walks into a room, he owns the room instantly. Like, if Dame was to walk in here with whoever the most famous rapper is right now, right? Drake, right? If Dame was to walk in this room with Drake right now, Dame is still going to own the room. Yeah. And that's like, think about that. He's 47 years old, hasn't put out any music, hasn't run a record label in forever. He just has this fearlessness about him that I really, I sort of borrowed from now in my life, right? And I got a chance to be around Dame and Kanye a few times. And what I noticed was that same sort of fearless moniker, that fearless posture that you see in Kanye is from Dame. I watch Kanye kind of shrink when Dame comes around in a way that you never see Kanye do. But the point of that is Dame reminds you, if he's with you, he's like, why don't you think you're the best at this? Why are you allowing other people to define your place in life? When he took me to meet Kanye, I'm riding in the car with him. And stop me if I told you this story before, but and I'm like, yo, can you call Kanye and ask him, can I get a feature? All I wanted was a feature, bro. Like, I'm a big fan. First of all, I'm embarrassing Dame the whole time in studio because I'm like fanning out over Ye, right? I'm like, yo, man, like, I love you, dog. Like, he's like, bro, chill out. Like, you acting crazy.
You right there.
And, yeah, right. And but then I was like, yo, I want to get a feature for him. And he was like, he said, how would that help you? I was like, well, get me a lot of people that look at my music and I'll get some of his fans. He was like, but you'd always be his son from here on out. He was like, you're better than Kanye. And he was like, if you don't believe that, then why are you even playing this game? You know what I'm saying? And like, just that sort of confidence and fearlessness that he gave me It's something I'll always be grateful for. You know, Damon's still an asshole, you know what I mean? Still hard to get along with, but just the way that he believes in his people is inspiring, right? And I look at what Jay or Kanye or anyone else around him accomplished. I think is really the way that he kind of coaches you up to believe, even if you're not better than Kanye, to believe that you can be, and start saying that you are, and sort of try to live up to that. So that's what it was like, man. Just inspirational as hell, bro. Like, incredible. Yeah.
Joshua Gunn, recording artist, lyricist, and future city councilman.
I pray you're right, brother. I pray you're right.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Time. I appreciate it, man. Big ups to you, man.
And good luck to you. And I also just want, while I have you, I want to just inspire you in this moment, because it's very critical, because you're in a wave, right? Yeah. AOC, all of the millennials, the young folks who are stepping up and saying yes to public service. Right. So I want to honor you in this moment to say that you are setting a stage and you are setting a standard for the young people who are looking to you to transition from careers and to step out and say, I don't care what I'm doing right now, I'm going to stop, or I'm going to shift and pivot so that I can really serve. Yeah. And that's very empowering and inspiring. So I just want to honor you.
Thank you, bro,
for that, and best of luck to you.
Thank you, man.
All right.
Appreciate you, bro.
Yes, sir.